Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Halifacts Oasis. This is going to be my solo Lisa's Oasis segment that I haven't done in a little while. I used to try to do them once a week, but I kind of get the attitude of who cares what I think. But I like doing this. What I have here in my hands is the Halifax County Forensic Audit Report that we're going to discuss. But before we get to that, and there's still a lot of questions, but I feel like there's some answers that might clarify things. Because on April 21st, there's going to be a meeting where this thing is discussed. I think it's also a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, and I'm going to be there for that. So I think prior to that, or anybody going out with their pitchforks and torches, we should educate ourselves on what this thing is, what it was given, what some of the outcome means, and what's being done about it, etc. So we'll talk about that. But first, I want to go to website. I haven't updated a lot of stuff lately, but I'm trying to do that now and share some of that with you. All right, first we're looking at the website here. Let's see what is upcoming. Oops, I didn't mean to hit that, but that's okay. Because I just published it. So what is coming up? We have right here, let's start at the beginning. Well, it doesn't matter. They're not in perfect order. But here we have vendors are being asked to go back. Nah, come on, man. See, this little pop-up, something new. That didn't used to be here. Anyway, Virginia Auxiliary is calling vendors to participate in the 41st Annual Virgilina Summerfest on Saturday, May 23rd. There's a QR code you can get. This is the time it's open, the cost. And I think the QR code is the only place to get more information. I would think there'd be a phone number, maybe not. On May 30th, the Court of Arts and Muses. It's going to be on Cage Trail. It's early bird prices here. It's a fantasy ball that sounds interesting. That looks like the flyer got cut off. But that's coming up. We also have the Veterans Race of Remembrance. That's not until November. Of course, the 4th of July. The Court of Art and Muses, the Renaissance Fair and Fantasy Ball. That's the thing we just talked about. I've got it on here twice. This is a better flyer to give you more information. I might delete the other one. Then we have this is in September, Quarter Place Tribute. This is coming up May 5th. Centera, I believe, is sponsoring this. A lunch and learn, arthritis versus joint replacement needs. I need to go to that. I'm getting old and creaky. We have, I should know how to pronounce that because I lived in China. I believe it's Qigong Yoga Fusion on Sunday on the 19th. Oh, wait. That's this coming Sunday. On Main Street. These are really cool things to attend, especially if you find stuff about meditation and whatnot. Advise checking it out. Here's a homeschoolers makers market. This looks really cool. It's all handmade and homegrown by the homeschoolers in the area in partnership with the market and Power of Produce. I briefly got to see some of them when I covered the market in the last South Boston Market podcast. But unfortunately, my time had run out and I had to leave. But this is something I'd like to cover. It's Friday, April 24th, which is next week. I do believe I can cover that. Oh, no, but it's at 12. I have to be in Richmond that morning. Oh, no, my Richmond trip's the following. Anyway, I'm going to try to cover it. Then we have a Mother's Day at the market. That's May 9th. Don't forget, Mother's Day will be coming up. Paint a flower pot. Win a Mother's Day gift basket. They're going to have stacked mini cakes. It's sponsored by all these local companies. Canned goods, homemade crafts. I've covered the South Boston Farmers Market, and it was really cool. I need to do it again. This, I know it's not Halifax County, but this is a big event in the area in Clarksville, the Big Lake Flea Market. That's going to be up May 9th, and they're still looking for vendors if you have stuff you want to get rid of. The Woodbine's having a spring bazaar on May 9th as well. Never been to that. I might try to cover it. And there's some information in Buffalo Junction that will be. The 25th, which is next week, Earth Day. They're going to have an extravaganza on South Main Street in Halifax. We've got, normally I don't advertise for businesses, but I've heard this girl's really good, Mama Breeby. And that's going to be at Springfield Distillery on May 8th. And that's something I may wind up going to see. We also have the Court of Art and Muses. Oh, that's the Renaissance Fair again. Cage Trail. Ha! Somehow I've got this in here like multiple times. I need to take one or two out. This is what? A Fairy Festival. That's in Nathalie. That is on May 2nd. That looks really interesting. Now here's the whole calendar of events for the farmers market. You can see here they've got the Mother's Day. They'll have Wednesday at the market kickoff. They'll have music, Touch a Truck, Summer Breeze, Stars and Stripes. A lot of stuff going on there. This is all about voting when they have early voting. April 21st is actual election day to vote. And this is on the proposed constitutional amendment. I've already told everybody how I feel about that. I encourage people to vote yes. And now we're back to the vendors. Ooh, get away. So you want to see me do a quick real-time edit? This here is a duplicate. So all I have to do is click it, go over on this side, and remove from gallery. And then you won't see a repeat of that. And I'm going to tell it I'm done. And we're going to publish it. And now we have the current events going on. And I tell people, I ask all the time, please, if you have something, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm missing something from Tri-County here. I'll need to check it out. Get my mouse back here, cover that up, and go back to me. Hello again. If you have an event, like I said, I don't advertise for companies. I mean, if you want to do a paid advertising spot, that's fine. That would be something to get in touch with me about. But, you know, for all these local events and flea markets and things going on, I really would like for more Ruritan clubs, fire departments, when you have your fundraisers, if you would please just send me an email. It's just halifactsoasis@gmail. I'd be happy to advertise you. I'm very excited that I've connected with Brooke Neal Network this week because she does something very similar, but she's much better at it than I am, of connecting the community. I learned so much about Brooke Neal when that last interview I did with the mayor and Miss Tracy. Check it out. I've had some good interviews here lately and hope you guys are following them. It'd be nice if people would like and comment, because it seems that only the controversial things in town are people really focusing on. So, you know, we need to balance it out. I'm also going to show you what else have I updated on the website. Let's look at the price of things. All right, so back to where I was. I had a rather lengthy break there. We're going to talk about prices for just a second. And here we go. I've updated. This is what I use as Food Line, but what I did was update our database that I use. So let me move that over here to this screen so you can see that. All right, and I quit doing this for a little while because, first of all, no one was interested. I was putting a lot of effort into it, and it just didn't seem like anybody cared about these prices. Because you can see, nothing changed. Here's November. I was doing it every week. Then I started skipping. I did February 3rd, and then here's today. And you see, nothing changed. That price actually went down. Same here. And I got the VIP prices and whatnot. But I decided, since very clearly we all know that gas prices have gone crazy, it's a little bit better like this week than it was last week and the week before. Why can't I get my mouse back? There it is. So, yeah, let's have a look at this real quick. So what's happened just since February 3rd in the last couple of weeks? See, now we're starting to see the effects of the tariffs and this war going on, etc. Because it's a bit of a delay. When something changes, the effects don't necessarily happen immediately. Sometimes there's a bit of a delay. And now we're starting to see it. And it's going to get much, much worse over the summer. Even if all these issues are resolved, you're still going to have prices going way up before they start to come down. But I got to tell you, in my lifetime, I've never seen anything come down. Once it's up, it's up. So we've got milk here that's jumped 20% to $3.39. Ground beef has jumped again 20 cents to $7.49, and I have not bought ground beef unless it's been marked down special for months. Eggs, oh, look at that. Eggs have stayed the same. What about the price of eggs? Soda has stayed the same. The chips have stayed the same. The bread has stayed the same. Cereal has stayed the same. Aw, Snickers went up 20 cents for a candy bar. See, I wouldn't pay $2 for a candy bar. Cheese has stayed the same. Beer has gone up 50 cents. That's a much bigger increase. Water packs actually went down a little bit. Crackers stayed the same. Coffee stayed the same. Surprisingly, coffee I expect to go up much higher. And of course, we know gas has jumped. Right now, it's $1 at $3.75. It's $1 jump since February, but it was $3.99 last week. So I'm going to try to do this every 2 or 3 weeks so that we can watch. And cigarettes have stayed the same. So yeah, I want to do this, every couple of weeks or so. And we'll keep track and watch. I can do little flip tables and charts and stuff to show you, like on a graph, but I just don't think people are that interested. But it's worth talking about once in a while because this is affecting us because, we all need groceries. We all have to buy them. What have your shopping habits changed at all? Mine has. Like I said, I don't buy ground beef anymore unless it's that manager special markdown or it's going to be expired the next day because I've got a freezer I can throw it in. I go to the day old bread place. The one in Danville is really nice. There's one here in South Boston, and I'll buy 4 or 5 loaves when it's on special and throw it in the freezer. So there's little things like that, but I've always been kind of tight and cheap because I was a single mom of 3, so I had to learn how to shortcut left and right, and that habit just never left me. Not that I have money to spare. So yeah, there's the prices. And we talked about the website. What else did I want to talk about before getting into this forensic audit? Now, I've got an interview coming up tomorrow that's a follow-up with the county administrator, Ron Braid. Let me shrink this down some. There we go. And he's going to talk some more about this audit. But I've gotten really, really curious about it because I've been trying to track the history of this audit being done. Okay, I had to interrupt myself there because I had filmed probably 30, 45 minutes of going through some paperwork, trying to understand it, and then I realized this is way too complicated. Let me finish it and come back. I've been working on this for 3 days. I was even changing clothes back to the original day for continuity reasons, and now I'm just like, I don't care, whatever. I feel like I've done a good job getting this into some graphical timelines, PowerPoints, and things because there's many pieces to this to explain it to you. Again, April 21st, joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. And they're going to have an open forum to discuss the forensic audit. Okay? So let me start with this timeline I've created. I'm a very visual person, and I needed to do this for my own kind of sanity in sorting this out. So let me show you what I've created here. And yes, I'm putting quite a bit of time into this. So I think I can blow this up just a little bit. View. Zoom. Just a wee bit more. Let's go to 135. Okay. All right. That's good. So what I'm showing you here is a timeline that I myself personally created. And what we're seeing here, this is the timeline. In January of 2025, we got a new board. Supervisor Claiborne becomes chairman. In February of 2025, in other words, right after that, Finance Director Stephanie Jackson, who'd been there 19 years, resigns. Apparently, there was some conflict between her and Claiborne, and he didn't let her sit in on budget meetings, and for that reason, she resigned. In March of 2025, Tamika Morgan was contracted as interim finance director. I cannot find a lot in the minutes about this, how it happened, how she was found, who appointed her, etc. Then in July of 2025, an RFP was issued for a forensic audit. And the selection of the forensic audit team of Premier came at the recommendation of Ms. Morgan. In August of 2025, County Administrator Scott Simpson was fired, And in August, Tamika Morgan was formally contracted as interim finance director and interim county administrator. In January, Miss Morgan resigns, and in February, now this is 2026, she resigns, and in February, the forensic audit report was released. So we want to kind of look at the time between July and February, the time they issued the RFP and hired this company, contracted with Premier Services, and the time they released the report in February 2026. That's 6 months. And I think it was supposed to happen sooner than that, but a delay was put on. But anyway, we're looking at a 6-month period. So the main player here seems to be Miss Morgan, because she was working as the interim finance director for the duration of the 6 months, and for most of the time as acting county administrator. Okay? So there's your timeline on this forensic audit. Now, the people that were interviewed by the Premier Group who conducted the audit were 12 people. The ones here in purple were not asked to interview. These other 12 people were. The ones in red were interviewed but are no longer with the county. And the ones in blue were interviewed and are still with the county. Okay? The ones in purple were not interviewed, and I've added them because you would think logically these are people who are of importance when speaking of records and accounting. One of them was the current interim finance director, Mr. Montoro, was not interviewed. The payroll specialist, Sandra Williams, was not interviewed. And the accounting payroll clerk, Ben Harris, was not interviewed. 5 supervisors were interviewed, and they don't control direct operations. They don't oversee it. All these other people do. They are there to look at and approve what is brought forth to them by the other players. So, as you can see, we have the county administrator and also the current county administrator. I should probably add him to this. He was not interviewed. But he was also not hired, I think, until after this report came out. Nevertheless, we have 3 finance directors. The one who resigned in February, Tamika Morgan, the interim one, who was there throughout the audit process, and the current one, and then Karen Buckyuk, who came from the school, but she was only there for 3 days. She didn't really count, but she was still part of the process, and probably didn't have much to offer as far as an interview, as much as these accounting and payroll people would have. So it's interesting, the 12 people they chose for interviews and the ones they didn't choose. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at. All right, so one of the things I want to show you is some PowerPoints, most of which I created. I didn't create all of them. And the first thing I'm going to show you is you're going to hear something about a Munis system a lot throughout this report and discussion afterward. And it's spelled M-U-N-I-S. I did a little brief PowerPoint, no pizzazz, no pictures, just to explain a quick overview of what it is. If you've ever worked for the Virginia state government, you know there's always something you got to log into for payroll or time or whatever. It's usually a comprehensive program that covers everything. And a popular one with local governments is called Munis. When I worked for the state, it was called Cardinal, and it was very user-friendly, very easy to access. Now, I'm not familiar with this particular program, but I do think they all run along the same vein. So let me run through this little PowerPoint I created real quick. It's, and let's make it as a show so you can read it well. All right, it's just a quick introduction. Governments and schools use it. It's an enterprise resource planning system for the public sector organization. It was developed by Tyler Technologies. It's used by local governments and school systems. It centralizes financial and administrative operations. The core functions are financial management, budgeting, accounting, payroll, HR, procurement and purchasing, asset and inventory management. Under financial management, what it does is it tracks your budget and expenditures. It maintains a general ledger. It processes accounts payable and receivable. Sorry, drinking my coffee. And it supports audits and reporting. So I know what you're thinking. Well, damn, this just does it all. This is a Cadillac. That's exactly right. In payroll and HR, it does employee record management. It does payroll processing. It does benefit administration, timekeeping, and attendance tracking. And this is exactly how Cardinal worked, the one I'm familiar with. It was just extremely user-friendly, organized. It's a great system. For procurement and operations, and I'm going to tell you going throughout this, I've never had accounting experience, or I've had very little accounting and budgeting. So a lot of this I've had to learn on the fly. And I'm going to tell you, 90% of it, I still don't understand. I still count on my fingers. I have a hard time with numbers. It's not my forte. It's not my area of expertise. So for procurement and operations, it does vendor management, purchase orders and approvals, contract tracking, inventory and asset control, user access, and this is something that's discussed. You have role-based permissions. In other words, you have administrator or you have employee, or the system I used at the state level. Obviously, I could not get into any administration or anything because I was just not that tier or level of employee. But it also has employee self-service portals. I could enter it, to ask for time off, use PTO, whatever that case was. You can also access pay stubs and benefits and your workflow approvals, like I just said, PTO. Why does this matter? It ensures financial accountability. It provides audit trails. It improves efficiency and transparency. And it supports compliance with regulations. Some of the common challenges requires proper training. I know it took a while to understand Cardinal that I used just as an employee. So as you graduate the levels of authority within the system, therein lies training. And that is also mentioned in the outcome of this audit, that there wasn't enough training. In fact, I think it said there was no training, which I don't think that was necessarily true. The data entry must be accurate. Obviously, if humans are putting in information, they make mistakes, they make typos, intentional or not. So the data entry has to be accurate because this is a computer. It's not going to find a human error necessarily, unless it's balancing of something, of course. It's a very complex system, which goes back to why the training is so important. And another challenge is the underutilization of features, which I found to be interesting because we often get things like, if you use PowerPoint or Gmail or any other software program that's, common daily, there's features that you probably don't know about that you can use. I'm learning a lot of this AI stuff, which I find fascinating. You got to remember it's not the end all be all, but there's features that this will do for you that you may not know about. Again, it could be Gmail, it could be AOL, it could be whatever. So this is a challenge with the Munis system. There are so many features on it. And what does this go back to again? Training, expert training, and probably ongoing training for this system. So it's a critical system for managing public funds and operations. And proper use would ensure transparency, compliance, and efficiency. Sounds great, right? And you know what? Ooh, what happened here? I got to end show. So let me transition back here. Again, all a learning curve. So when you listen to what this program does, and you think, yeah, this is a gold standard, you're right. This is the end all be all for, it's not going to be 1,001% perfect because it relies on humans for accurate data entry. The county's had this for almost 20 years, and it's like a subscription. You have to pay for it, the use of it or something. And according to not chairman, I keep wanting to use the word commissioner because that's what we called him in Georgia, and I think North Carolina does too. Supervisor Claiborne mentioned in a meeting that we've had this for 20 years and we've invested $2.5 million over that 20 years in user fees, and he's asking why it's not being used. It is being used. We're going to get more into that later. So we have a long history of this program. We pay for this program. It's covers pretty much everything that needs to be covered within the government system. I'm curious to know, I wonder what I wonder what South Boston uses. I should have called and asked. I wonder what Halifax uses because I don't know. Anyway, so that's Munis. Now let's move on to the audit. Okay, so here is the PowerPoint of the presentations. Let me transition. Let me blow that up and let's go through that. I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to claim to understand all of this, but we're going to present it together because everything we're going to talk about today, I'm going to have documentation for it. So, they have your introduction, objectives, applicable regulations and guidance, methodology, summary of findings, schedule of findings, Q&A. I'm not going to read this entire thing or we'd be here for an awfully long time. So we're going to skim some of it. This is here where you can look at it and make your own conjecture. So here's your introduction telling you what they asked for, the 5 fiscal years, 21 to 25. It would be an independent, objective assessment of financial records and internal control environment, the focus on verifying fund balances, identifying financial irregularities or fraud indicators, and evaluating compliance with the applicable laws. So the objective of this, the primary scope, was to establish and verify fund balances, identify irregularities, evaluate compliance, assess the adequacy of internal controls and financial management practices, and provide recommendations for improving these. So, these are the applicable regulations and guidance, and they're just citing what laws or policies, regulations are enacted that should be utilized throughout this audit. All right, so their methodology, they had a planning phase. Then they had a fieldwork phase, and then they had a reporting phase. This fieldwork phase is more or less what that I have been checking into. So they are reviewing files provided by the client. Now, to review files, you have to ask for client. Remember, this company's in Maryland, and they did this remotely. They did not come out to Halifax County and say, show me a file cabinet or show me your computer system. This was all done through interviews and request via remote. So, to review files provided by the client, they had to ask the right people, correct? They had to have the right questions to ask. So we're going to look at that. They sent a planned interview name list, and I've shown you that. 12 people they interviewed to the finance director and later the county administrator, and updated based on the county feedback. Then they were scheduling and conducting the interviews. Then they selected samples based on interview information. If I ask you certain questions but not ask you where something is, how are they going to select a sample when I didn't ask you the question? So personally, reading, and I have read through all of this stuff over the last few days, well, actually a couple weeks, and I'm seeing some serious red flags in the methodology of this. And I'm not saying this was intentional, and I'm not saying it was incompetent. I'm just calling what I'm seeing here. If I want samples of something, I have to ask the right people for them, or they're not going to get provided. So how do I provide feedback on samples I don't get? You know, one thought I had going through this was like, it's like you hire me to clean your house, but I can't come to your house. What does that do? They prepared and followed up with open items. They performed analytical procedures, selected samples for review and testing, reviewed and evaluated sample supporting documents against applicable criteria. Here is where there are major issues with the methodology. They did the planning, they did the reporting, and you guys, we paid $50,000 for this. So, the summary of the findings. All of these show significant deficiency and noncompliance. For 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, every single one, significant deficiency and noncompliance. Now, to arrive at this condition through their methodology, my question is, how thorough was this? Who did they talk to, and what information did they get? So, the schedule of findings, 30 payroll transactions were selected. Remember this when I bring up a new PowerPoint. They selected 30 payroll transactions because some of these transactions, they were asking for payroll of commissioners. Commissioners aren't on payroll. They have a stipend that they get paid monthly. So you would not have that type of information for that type of employee. It's like asking someone who is salaried to give you their timesheet of hours. That's not how it works. So of course, we're going to have recommendations based on what these conditions are. And throughout these 12 findings, it's the same thing repeated basically over and over. We didn't get this, so here's what we recommend. Now, that's not to say this whole thing is suspect and there's room for improvement. Of course there is. Some of these are very valid recommendations. Finding 2, insufficient time in attending documentation. Again, how do you have time and attendance documentation for someone on salary to support the payroll disbursement? So that was a big flaw here. And again, I have a summary of some of these flaws and things coming. Finding 3, inconsistency between timesheet hours and payroll earnings. Here's the finding. Here's the recommendation. Like I said, I'm not reading all this. You can stop and read it yourself and formulate your own opinion. Finding 4, insufficient evidence of supervisory. My goodness, they spelled supervisory wrong. And I know this is nitpicking and petty, but damn, spelling errors drive me crazy. There's a lot of those, and there's some time errors as well. Insufficient evidence of supervisory approval over employee timesheets. 2, 3, and 4 are very similar. Lack of supporting documentation. All right, here is where they asked for the fund balances, accounts payable, fixed assets, revenue, federal, a lot of this stuff, and that they did not get supporting documentation. Here is where we're coming into everybody saying missing paperwork, missing paperwork. This should all be in Munis, but they didn't get it. And that is true. Maximize utilization of the Munis document attach functionality. Okay, if those are there, but they did not interview or ask for the files for the employee who was overseeing this, that's going to create the gap. However, we had an interim financial director. Did she, which was Miss Morgan, did she present this documentation to them or did she not? And she was one of the ones interviewed, and we'll discuss that too. Finding number 6, lack of training to perform assigned duties. Multiple personnel were interviewed and they did not know the functionality or proper use of Munis. Now, remember, 5 of the 12 interviews were with commissioners. 5 of the 12 interviews were with supervisors. Supervisors do not handle day-to-day operations. They are the overseeing body that makes approvals, and approves whatever it is, allocation of money or hiring, whatever, staffing, HR things. So their recommendation is to develop a formal Munis training program. And absolutely, from what I oversaw, there was really only one person who was fluent in Munis, and that's the person that resigned in February, Stephanie Jackson, the financial director. So after that, because she left, that threw things in a bit of chaos, and a lot of people are not trained. This is a very complicated system. So they recommend mandatory onboard training for new and interim staff, engage the Munis vendor support, designate a Munis system administrator, implement competency assessments, establish training and tracking, link training compliance to performance management. These are excellent recommendations. People need to be, it's just like when you hire someone to run your front desk, and if they don't know Microsoft Word, how is that going to be helpful? Anybody working a front desk needs to know basic Microsoft platform operations and software. That's a given in any job I've worked in. So finding number 6 was quite valid, I think, and had good recommendations. Finding number 7, lack of written policy and procedures. I have in hand a packet of procedures and policy that are there, and they are for financial management. So it probably needs to be more comprehensive But it's not that nothing was there. And again, we'll talk about this in another PowerPoint. Right now, I'm just showing you what was the 12 findings presented to us from this company that we spent $50,000 on. All right, so we were at finding number 8. Go back to the show. Hello, come on, computer. The lack of segregation of duty, significant deficiency, and non-compliant. This one's a little hard for me to speak to because I don't know the hierarchy or staff structure of the board, but I do know that there are many, like there's a finance office that handles certain things. There's a payroll person. So it wasn't one person doing all of that. So here in the condition, where'd my mouse go? Bloody hell. I have the hardest time finding it. There we go. They said there was deficiency in terms of segregation of duties as identified by the finance department and broader financial management operations. The evidence gathered through interviews. Remember now, so much of this is based on those 12 interviews. That the key financial responsibilities were concentrated in a single individual without adequate oversight, reviews, or controls. Now, I think this is very misleading because they didn't interview a lot of in fact, the only person they interviewed in the finance department was the interim financial director, which was Tamika Morgan. All the other people, they didn't. And additionally, the significant deficiency of the segregation of duties was noted in the administration of the county's solar energy facilities or solar projects. The planning and zoning administrators identified as overseeing both the planning and the application package review functions, as well as the negotiation of revenue terms. That was previously managed with the county administrator. Well, how does he do it if there isn't a county administrator? So I feel sure that has been implemented. Finally, the deficiencies were identified in their hiring process for financial director position. The background investigation conducted as part of that hiring process was performed by human resources and payroll staff who subsequently came under the direct supervisory authority of the finance directory. This arrangement created a structural conflict of interest in which individuals responsible for vetting the finance director later reported that the same individual undermining the objectivity and independence of hiring control process. This I would like to see examples instead of this broad sweep here, because there are different positions for these things. I'm not quite sure what they're talking about undermining objectivity. And then here's the recommendations for that. Let's move on. Finding 9, retention policy is inconsistent with Virginia regulations. Now, I do agree, just as like the rules for the public speaking at meetings is very convoluted, unclear, redundant, and should be completely revamped. I've got some policies I can show you, but they're not very, I think they should be more broad. And here are the recommendations. Adopt more of the retention policy, transition to digital 100%, leverage Munis document attachment functionality. That is in place and has been used. And just train and establish better compliance. Communicate retention records requirements to the county leadership. Yes, that's anytime you can expand and improve policy and compliance, of course, that's something any business, anybody should do. Finding 10, fund balance outlier. I don't understand fund balance, so this was a little difficult for me. During the analysis of the year-end fund balance for 21 through 24, it was noted that fund balance, restricted fund, and fund balance assigned reflected an unusually high balance compared to historical trends. Now, I think this had something to do with the high school. The variance was not adequately supported by documentation. Now we're back to where the records or formally explained in financial reports. So you see here this fund balance. And see, I don't understand what is non-spendable, what is committed, unassigned, I guess is, my brain would say surplus, I don't know. So this bit here, I don't really understand. Somebody who knows accounting or these financial expertise could probably speak to this better. And I'm hoping to get comments. I hope people will engage in this with me. It's the why I'm doing it. And then they have their recommendations on what to do for that. Funding number 11, lack of competitive procurement for external audit services. So it looks like they use the same external audit firm. And what they're recommending is to have a rotation of different companies instead of depending on the one. I mean, that sounds cool. Okay. Inadequate knowledge transfer and work transition procedures resulting from high turnover of key financial personnel. This has just been over the last year. It says they're reviewing, as far as I know, the financial director has been the overturn a lot of in the last year. Finance director and county administrator. Yeah, there's been a turnover there too. There were 3 different financial director changes between February 25 and February 26. Yes. That's what we discussed and had on our flow chart. Additionally, there were gaps between the departure of prior key personnel and assumptions of duties by incoming staff. The county did not maintain adequate written transition procedures, knowledge transfer documentation, or succession planning protocols. That's absolutely something that's needed. A place I used to work at was undergoing doing these very things, so that you don't have a problem with somebody coming in and not knowing what's happening. There needs, just like, when we change at a federal level, an outgoing president supposedly is going to welcome the new president and explain things. That hasn't happened sometimes. In fact, the door's been shut sometimes. Maintain a financial procedures manual. They do have a policy of which I have a copy, but it is not comprehensive and it should be a manual. And so on and so forth. And finally, okay, that's the last one. Then they opened it up for questions and answers. I was not there, so I can't tell you what was said or done. And I don't know if it was even live streamed, to be honest with you. All right, so let's go back here. All right, so what we've established so far, the time chart of what happened over the last year, the last 6 months of it, specifically regarding the forensic audit. Then we talked about Munis, the system that's in place with the county to track and verify and do everything it's supposed to do. And then we talked about the presentation of the forensic audit report. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how this report came about. We're going to talk about the 12 interviews, and we're going to talk about response from the county to each of these 12 points. Excuse me, I've got the hiccups. So when I go through just the highlights of these interviews, I'll probably add a little commentary based on meetings I've attended or watched. Some other things to put it in context. Okay? So this is just a kind of brief notation on these 12 interviews. And bear in mind that no one in the finance department was interviewed other than Tamika Morgan, the interim financial director. 5 county commissioners were interviewed who do not handle day-to-day operations or are not versed in Munis or anything like that. Most of them aren't here anymore. And one of the keys, I think, was the former financial director, Stephanie Jackson. All right, so I've got some quotes in here, and I please want you to bear 2 things in mind. Number 1, this forensic audit was based on these 12 interviews as evidence. Okay? The second thing I want you to bear in mind that 5 of the 12 interviews were conducted by Board of Supervisor members who did not have direct hands on day-to-day operations. They have no experience with Munis and basically are there to take reports from the finance office And the third thing, there is a third thing to bear in mind, that out of everyone that worked in the finance office during that time, only one person was interviewed, and that was Miss Morgan. So here are her quotes. She stated that no formal transition occurred. There was no guidance on file organizations or records. So in other words, she's saying, I kind of didn't know. And I have mentioned before that during the 6-month period of the investigation, the investigation, and the report of the forensic audit, she would have been the one who was the finance director and or interim county administrator. She said that she did not locate physical financial policies or procedures. I have in hand what's it called? Financial Policy Guidelines for Halifax County, Virginia, that were approved October 6, 2014. So bear in mind, she did this job primarily by remote, but she said she couldn't find them. But that does not mean they weren't there or that they were missing. Most of her work was performed remotely, so she had no access to physical files. And it was also stated somewhere in the report that some of the files were physical, even though the majority was on Munis. So her key point that she gave witness to was that she entered a broken system with no structure, no training, and limited access. But this is the person who was the finance director and briefly the county administrator for our county, and the person that should have been the point man for getting files to actually do a complete forensic audit. Stephanie Jackson was interviewed, and she was the former finance director. They spelled her name wrong. This is not me. This is the forensic audit, straight how it came. She said that the county adopted a formal financial policy around 2014, and that's what I just mentioned I actually have in hand. So why Miss Morgan couldn't find it or get it or ask about it, I don't know. Ms. Jackson also stated in this interview that fund balance allocations were presented to the board annually. She left due to harassment by a board member, and because she resigned and Mr. Claiborne took her out of the budget meeting process, that is why she resigned. And she's stating that the structured system did exist, but there was a breakdown due to conflict of interest and personality. And Mr. Claiborne, in a meeting I was in, did state that he has had questions about finances for years, but there is absolutely nothing in the minutes that I can find to attest to that, number one. And number two, these finances were passed unanimously year after year. They also interviewed Scott Simpson, who at the time was county administrator. I should say at the beginning of it. And he said no standardized or recurring financial reporting package. Internal controls were primarily guided by external auditors. There were no comprehensive procedural manuals beyond job descriptions. And he's speaking as the county administrator, not a finance director. And the key point from this interview is that leadership operated without formal systems or consistent reporting. That is something absolutely addressed in this audit, and that this county, I do believe, has admittedly stated that they need to make improvements on that and put more formal systems in and have the checks and balances. Shayna Hetzel was interviewed. She said no formal policies and procedures are currently in place. Again, talking through the Treasury, I don't think she was addressing the financial policy guidelines that I have in hand or didn't know. Reach out to ask where transactions should be processed. And the key point is that the core of the financial operating was operating without written guidance. And I'm going to believe that was day-to-day procedures from what she stated. Now, the first board member I've got up here is Mr. Brandon. And this is consistent with all the board members stating that they were not responsible, trained, or part of the day-to-day operations, and they relied on reports from the team. But anyway, his statements in the interviews that the responsibilities were inappropriately shifted to the treasurer's office, financial records appeared poorly maintained, potential conflict of interest with financial oversight. So he's the first one that's bringing up some pretty strong red flags. And I would like to know how he arrived at these conclusions if the board members were not involved in the day-to-day operations and relied on reports from the team. Now, Mr. Brandon also did not run for re-election. So when this report came out, he was not there to address or face questions about his statements. So when they have this meeting on April 21st, he's not going to be there for us to say, why do you say the records were poorly maintained if you didn't handle day-to-day operations or were aware or trained on that? What made you say that? That would be my first question. Why do you say that? And give me some examples. And what is the conflict of interest? I'm not quite sure what he means about that. Oops, did I do the key point? And then Mr. Claiborne, who was the board chair at the time, he clearly states the board relies on figures and reports. They did not perform in-depth reviews of the financial records, but he raised concerns. But majority continued improvement. It wasn't majority. This was unanimous. I looked this up myself. I checked the minutes. It was unanimous approving these reports year after year. Oversight existed in name but not in practice. So he's straight up saying we relied on them. We did not perform in-depth reviews, but some concerns were raised, which I cannot find in the minutes at all. And the majority continued approving. Well, I looked at what roll calls were there, and it was unanimous. So I think this is misleading. But again, let me insert here. These are the interviews that the forensic audit relied on to make their report. So if they have an interview and something's not true and it's in their report, how valid is that? Mr. Pinnell, who lost his election and is no longer a supervisor, so whatever he says can't be followed up on. But at the time, he was a supervisor, and he also says he did not have deep involvement in financial operations. Recommendations were sent to the administrator and then to the board. So he's saying board members lack detailed financial engagement, but also within this interview, which I have all the documentation if anybody wants to see it, he stated that Ms. Jackson, the financial director, was grossly mismanaging and cost the county millions in funds. If he's stating what I'm showing you right here, how could he make that statement in the interview? So what I'm kind of piecing together is that people on the board are wanting to throw shade or throw Stephanie Jackson under the bus when she quit because of a conflict. Maybe she didn't proceed to train somebody or however. It sounds like it was rather abrupt and there was a lot of conflict and she claimed harassment. And now during these interviews, the shade is being thrown at her, and some of it's blatantly not true. And I've produced the documentation showing you that. Now, one of the administrators, Nancy Spencer, in her interview, she stated SolarTrack, Munis, and Excel. So people did know, some people in their departments did know the Munis system because it was stated that in the report that no one knew about it but one person, and that's not true. They would provide spreadsheets to the auditors, and she said there were parallel systems used instead of centralized control. Mr. Smith, who's also a Board of Supervisor member, he's the tiebreaker, so he doesn't participate in the discussions as much. And he straight up tells you, I don't participate unless there's a tie. He could not specifically articulate reasoning in some decisions, and sometimes critical decisions lacked clear rationale. So the overall breakdown from the interviews. Interviews don't mean facts. System-wide lack of policies, procedures, and trainings. They have admitted, yes, we do need to beef that up. Financial operations dependent on individuals, not systems. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Board oversight limited and reactive. That's very true. And that, I believe, is being addressed. Documentation missing or inaccessible. From everything I've read, it was inaccessible, not given. Miss Morgan was working remotely, and she straight up said she didn't have access to physical files. But wouldn't you think that during an audit, you would not be remote? You would physically go there and you would physically find these things? I mean, why didn't they ask any of these questions? It's puzzling to me. So the conclusion was that there were some systemic failures and not isolated errors. All right. So there is just some highlights from the interviews. Now, there has been... All right, so this was rather lengthy and tedious, so I have just absolutely trimmed this down to the response of the county. Now, the first response the county gave, they said, okay, we agree with all 12 points, we'll fix it. And I think that was kind of a deer in the headlight gut reaction. And as we have seen, they're very reactionary anyway. But now we've got a more detailed rebuttal. So, finding number 1, reconciliation support unavailable. The correction in evidence shows that Munis reports do exist, but the key staff was not interviewed. The audit finding, insufficient documentation, elected officials not required to submit timesheets. So how can you say there's no, I said this before, how do you say there's no documentation? Or I want a timesheet on a salaried person. It makes no sense. The audit findings said inconsistencies were on finding number 3 now. The timekeeping, inconsistencies identified. The differences were due to an accrual process. Number 4, approvals, lack of supervisory approval. The approval lies with department heads. Number 5, documentation, missing support. The records were maintained. The sampling was flawed. Training, lack of training. The staff was trained and the system was used. It may need to be more widespread and comprehensive, and there's been such a high turnover. Obviously, it's something that needs replication. Finding 7, the policies, no written policies. Policies have been adopted and documented, and I have copies of those. Not maybe enough, not as comprehensive as they should be, but there is something there. The segregation, they said there was lack of. The treasurer handled the controls. Retention inconsistent. State standards were followed, and there's evidentiary information. I'm just giving you the brief rebuttal, because this is so long it's driving me nuts. The fund balance, they said there's an unexplained variance. This was linked to VPSA borrowing. Audit findings said no competition, but all approvals are documented. For transition, documentation and meetings were complete. So the key conclusion is this right here, and this is what I've been trying to say all along. The findings relied on limited interviews. The evidence indicates incomplete review and unsupported conclusions. So that's a really good synopsis when you take this all, come on now, go out of here, in stride together. Let's go over here and transition. You guys, I've been working on this for actually a couple of weeks, but for the last 3 solid days, I've been reading documents, analyzing them, researching, checking, going through minutes, looking at the board documentation on the website. And this is the conclusion for me. But my goal is to present to you an explanation of Munis, which I did, the report of the forensic audit, which I did, the timeline of what's happened in the last year with this audit and our board, which I did, show you who was interviewed, who isn't there anymore, who wasn't interviewed, and how they're key players in this. That's been done. And now I've taken a rebuttal and compared it with the findings and giving you a conclusion on that. You may not agree. That's fine. But I have all of the document or all of the pieces that you need to put together to create your own picture. And also, what I see in conclusion is that there's some misrepresentation in these interview notes that I have, and I didn't present all of those, but like I said, there was some correlation with a couple of supervisors that were squarely going after the former financial director. And I think that's part of why she quit, was this conflict. And I thought to myself, why? Why are you doing this and doing it publicly? A lot of shade's been thrown at some of these board members. There used to be, they called it the faction, the group of five versus the minority. And now after the election, it's flipped. The minority is now the group of five. And I've tried to look at motivations and actions of all people involved. And the one person that seems to consistently be somewhat of an obstructionist, I've watched him walk out of meetings, I've watched him argue, I've watched him ask for roll calls when it wasn't necessary. As I've gone back in the history of things, I've thought, why? And a couple of the board members aren't even there anymore, so I'm not even going to say anything about any of that. But my thought was, Supervisor Claiborne, he was an attorney. An attorney should always dot their I's and cross their T's. So I never doubted his motivation, other than trying to clarify, put things in place, do what's best for the county, until someone in the county told me about their experience having him as an attorney. And it made me say, all right, let's go back a little bit. What I didn't know that I found out was that Mr. Claiborne has been suspended from the bar. And that suspension happened some time ago, and he was eligible to try and rectify it, but he didn't. So I decided to do a deep dive in why he was suspended from the bar. And it was disruption in the courtroom. It was obstructionism, and it was many other things directly involved to a case he was handling of not following processes, not working in the interest of the client, not doing things that were required. I don't want to go into details of it. It's all out there in public. If you want to go look up the records, you're welcome to. If you want me to lead you there, I will. But my only question, and I've tried to speak with Mr. Claiborne many times. He's promised me interviews, and then he would ghost me. I did it during the election. I did it after the election. Left messages. I sent emails. And he's never responded. So I just gave up. But here publicly now, I would like to ask you about why, from my appearance and what I'm looking, and it seems like you're not being a team player and you have a history of this. For example, saying that you've raised all these concerns, yet you've approved budgets and requests and everything year after year. Saying that you don't know anything about financial operations, but having this issue with Miss Jackson. These things aren't clear to me. I feel like there's contradictory information, and things that should be addressed. I'd love to speak to you about it. I'd love to hear your take on things. And the other bit I wanted to mention is that the goal of this county and every citizen in here is for progress, to do what's best for our people. And I don't think there's any perfect member of the Board of Supervisors. I think they all have their peccadillos and things. And I think there are some actively, I hate to use the word conspiring, there are some that are actively not working as team members. I think some are not 100% honest or transparent. I'm trying to avoid a cease and desist letter, but all of this is my opinion. And I wanted to bring information to you to make your own opinion. I could be completely wrong on things. That's how it goes. But I feel that I've done my due diligence. I have gone through all of these reports. Going through the minutes of board meetings is the most tedious work, but I did it for you. Now, you can do your own due diligence. I have a meeting with Mr. Braid, the county administrator, this evening, who is an extremely intelligent, hardworking man, and we're going to have a talk on camera. It's our follow-up interview, but we're going to talk a little bit about this budget. And now that I've processed all this over the last week, I feel like I can have a better conversation with him, because I'm telling you, I don't like this topic at all. At all. And then next week, on Tuesday, April 21st, I expect a high turnout from this county, without accusations, with information in hand. It's all right here for you to ask intelligent questions and gain an understanding and see where do we go from here. Because now we're going to pay another $40,000 to go back to this team to fix this report and make it accurate, not just based on limited interviews. That's what, personally, I would not have paid them. This is such a sucky report, in my opinion. But, I'm not the government. I'm just a John Q. citizen, whatever. But there you have it. That's the end of this one. This has been the most time-consuming and tedious Oasis, but I tried to do a thorough job. I'm trying not to look like I take sides with anything, because I hate when I get accused of that. But again, all the information is here. If there's something I've mentioned you want the information or report on, send me an email, send me a text, whatever, and I will send it to you. I've put up as much as I could, but I'm trying to be succinct. I'm trying not to be so far out there it gets confusing and convoluted. And just bear in mind that timeline, the interviews, the report, and the follow-up. All right, there you have it. See you next time. Yeah.